Thank you very much, Ruth. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you all very much for the invitation. And thanks to Brent Swallow also for challenging me to go broad on the topic, to sort of reflect on some of the things that have been meaningful to me. I also want to thank many of my collaborators along the way, some of whom may actually be attending this seminar. And if so, I hope you will chime in with thoughts on this. I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey from the CAPRi program, which is the CGIAR system-wide program on collective action and property rights, to the Promise of Commons initiative in India. The three themes are about transdisciplinary work, communications, and partnerships that take what may seem like kind of abstract concepts into something with practical applications in communities. So this is a picture of some commons in India. It's actually behind where I grew up. So this was the one of my favorite places to go and watch the goats in the evenings. But first of all, to get to this point of transdisciplinarity, I was fiddling around. These are kind of crude graphics, but disciplinary. Multidisciplinary is, multiple disciplines, but they're still kind of each in their silos. Interdisciplinary, trying to make the connections across them. And I used to describe myself as an interdisciplinary researcher, with a lot of, development sociology is on my degree, but a lot of economics, anthropology, other social sciences. And then I discovered the term transdisciplinary, which really seemed to fit better for what I love doing. And that is that the disciplines come together to solve a problem. Belmont Forum elaborated that a transdisciplinary approach is enabling inputs and scoping across scientific and non-scientific stakeholder communities, facilitating a systemic way of addressing a challenge. That includes initiatives that support capacity building that's required for that. And my name has a German ring to it. So apparently in the German, Transdisciplinary refers to the integration of diverse forms of research and specific methods for relating knowledge in problem solving. So I think that describes a lot of what we were about in the CAPRi program. So for those of you who are not familiar, the CGIAR is a consortium of international agricultural research centers, and CAPRi had all 15 of them participating, but also over 400 other partner organizations. It was convened by IFPRI, International Food Policy Research Institute, which is where I work. It was very active 1997 to 2010, and then a new sort of formulation in the CGIAR happened, something called the Research Program on Policies, Institutions, and Markets, and the CAPRi kind of became what's called a flagship under there on governance of natural resources. But during the CAPRi period, we held annual workshops on different aspects of how collective action property rights address things like technology adoption, devolution or decentralization of resource management, watershed management, market access, genetic resources, poverty reduction, gender, climate change, as well as methods for studying collective action. We had a lot of engagement with common property because, in a way, although we dealt with private and common property, the collective action really is strongest when you come on common property. And there we engaged a lot with the International Association for Study of the Commons, which Brenda Parley and your program hosted of a conference of some years ago. And the IASC, this International Association for Study of the Commons, is an active player in what I'm going to be talking about too. Then within CAPRi, we had a lot of demand for training workshops. So Brent hosted the first in East Africa in 2004, and then we did 2 in South Asia. And I'll come back to that in a bit about why that was influential. But we often got asked why it was relevant for a program in CGIAR, which is seen as kind of this technology. It's famous for, breeding rice varieties or wheat varieties and things like that. Why were we paying attention to property rights and collective action? Why did we think that was important? And so this figure is probably what carried the day and really established this. It arose from a conversation with Brent, Peter Hazel, and some others, where we were talking about our first workshop and a conceptual framework. And Brent said we needed institutions to deal with temporal and spatial externalities. And then this just clicked. So, if you take the time scale of any technology or natural resource management practice, if you're talking about things like high yielding varieties of wheat, that's short term. It's pretty easy, and you do it on one plot, pretty easy. But if you're talking about longer term things like planting trees, if you don't have tenure security and the right property rights, you don't have the incentive or the authority to do that. If you move up the spatial scale, integrated pest management, you can you get pretty short returns, but you can't really do it by yourself. You need to coordinate. You have to have collective action with your neighbors. And a lot of natural resource management is up here. And pretty much all of the commons is up here with where you need both collective action and you have to pay attention to the property rights. And we could draw this out, and I have drawn this out for a variety of different aspects. Now, when we presented this at the South Asia training, it also clicked with the staff from the Foundation for Ecological Security. They had sent in both years groups of about 8 to 10 of their field staff who were dealing with a lot of the issues we were covering. And they commented that CAPRi gave them the conceptual tools to think about their work in the field and really helped highlight especially the importance of commons. So they started to write notes about how to feed ideas from the workshop into their FES field manual. And then we started collaborating. So the commons in India include forest, pastures, water, fisheries, biodiversity, and they're kind of in mosaics of tenure where you have some private property like these paddy fields here in with forests that are part of the commons. And they have a lot of values, both economic direct ones, as well as ecosystem services, cultural, religious, and other values, which are often not recognized. This framing their work around the commons helped FES sort of communicate about what they were doing. We then collaborated with FES's training specialists with CAPRi in developing our source book. And they've used it in their training, but we distributed 1,000 copies and more online. And what we did was we took our CAPRi research articles and worked with the editors to simplify the language, shorten them a lot, but the researchers were closely involved in making sure we weren't dumbing them down too much. And then we worked with cartoonists to try and illustrate this. That source book then. So this graphic from a recent FES annual report shows how the CAPRi ideas have been taken up into what they call their core model, with property rights, secure property rights, and collective action in resource management and governance plans as 2 of 3 pillars of their core model. Now we're continuing to work with FES on how to do this. So so I'm going to come back to that in a minute too. Now over time, our ideas got more complex. This is an adaptation of that CAPRi box, but it goes up to the global scale now, not the national. And we realized that collective action isn't always what's needed. What's needed is coordination. And that coordination can be done by collective action or by the state, or sometimes even by markets. So that gets us into issues of polycentric governance, which was a concept I kind of avoided because I thought that people's eyes would glaze over, especially dealing with government or practitioners, but FES really caught on to that also. We collaborated on the Commons. They hosted the International Association conference in Hyderabad when just after Elinor Ostrom had won the Nobel Prize in Economics. FES managed to get Lynn Ostrom and me in to meet the Prime Minister and the whole Planning Commission. So we got a lot of high-level attention. But Jagdish Rao, the executive director of FES, pushed us to not just stay at that level, but asked what we had for first-mile delivery. We had shown that cooperation was important, but what could be done to actually strengthen that cooperation in communities that didn't have it? Well, we got to thinking about what we had learned about factors that led to cooperation. And in particular, that workshop I mentioned on methods for studying collective action. Here we were sitting, showing that we did actually work, a lot of discussion about this. We had a field trip and important bonding things sitting around the fire as well. Juan Camilo Cardenas, who is here and here from Colombia, came to that workshop and talked to us about experimental games, which he and others were using to assess the potential for collective action. So these games are usually used to measure as a research tool, but Juan Camilo had noticed that after playing the games in some communities in Colombia, when he went back to those communities, there was often higher cooperation. So we then said, well, can games be used as a tool to strengthen collective action? And we did this with groundwater in India, and then Juan Camilo tested this in surface water in Colombia. And what we discovered was that the games could really help change people's mental models and their understanding of the relationships between what they did and what was happening with the resource as well as with other people. They could, look at the effects of individual behavior, but the games also create kind of a safe space to try out different rules, different institutional arrangements. So what happens if we start making an agreement? What happens if we start enforcing that? So we did what we found, we then tried this out with groundwater in India, and then Thomas Falk also did this with FES for surface water in India. And what we found is that the communities viewed these games as a good learning event. They said, reportedly in some communities said, you've been coming and lecturing and telling us what we should be doing for a long time, but now we get it. And this was compared to kind of these usual teaching modes of telling people what they should be doing. We also found that the villages with games were significantly more likely to adopt rules for groundwater governance and or conduct an inventory of their water resources at least. So after we did this, FES applied the games in around 600 additional communities, and we now have resources to scale those up to 3,500 communities in India. And if you want, I'm happy to tell you all about that project. It's pretty exciting. Now, FES is really taking this to scale with a really sophisticated vision for systems change, where they are looking at, they want to affect the commons on a really broad scale in India. So they want to secure tenure for the commons for 30 million acres, around 130,000 communities and 38 million people. Within that, they want to really improve the governance, that management for almost half of that, in terms of 14 million acres, 17 million people, and to restore the environmental conditions to improve the incomes of people for 8 million acres. This is a major new grant they've received from Co-Impact. It's pretty exciting. And what they're doing is not just through them hiring people everywhere, but working through government programs and other NGOs and a part. So what are the broad lessons from this? First of all, I would say that research and even theoretical concepts, but especially conceptual frameworks, do have something valuable to offer, because these frameworks help you to understand what's going on. I love the phrase of, there's nothing so practical as a good theory. But the conceptual part is only part of it, what research can offer. You need empirical research results to provide the evidence. And that evidence, I think, is stronger if it draws from both qualitative and quantitative techniques. It makes them, whether they agree or there's a tension between them, we get a better understanding by combining them. Second lesson is that partnerships are key. And those partnerships, I would say, initially, start with learning to have partnerships across disciplines. And when I think back to CAPRi, and even more recent, some of the best interdisciplinary work has involved tension. And that can be a really creative tension, where, you know, you're really starting to say, I mean, most recently a study in Nepal where the qualitative and the qualitative results that this anthropologist knew and the quantitative results of that were coming out of the economists' analysis of the survey data really were not, they were disagreeing. And then we finally found that, pushed through to understand that they were each capturing something slightly different, and it was how those two fit together that was really important. Now, that's only going to be a creative tension if there is fundamental respect across the disciplines. And, I can give great examples working with Brent or others where, we would pick up each other's ideas and think that's really cool. Partnership, to actually have impact on the ground, I think partnership with practitioners is really important. And again, there's got to be respect, and there will be some tensions. And to make them creative, an illustration of that is when we started the games, when economists play these games, they usually say they have to be incentivized or they're not going to be, valid. So you have to pay people based on what they win in the game. And the NGO was saying, we actually don't want to do that. We think that could create tensions in the community. And we can't, if we scale this up, we can't be going into communities and paying them like that, because that creates a perception that we're a gravy train rather than just there to assist them. So we then said, okay, let's actually test whether you have to pay people. And we randomly assigned half of the communities people got paid, and half of the communities we just gave a lump sum contribution to the community fund. We found in our groundwater stuff that it didn't make any difference. Another study that's since tested it has found slight differences, but basically that was an example of where, threshing out why each of us wanted to do something worked out. So this is with civil society, and with that I would say it's not only NGOs, but member organizations. So one of the other partners that I don't have time to talk about or didn't have time to present is the Self-Employed Women's Association in India, which is a trade union of over 1.5 million women. And, what do we have to offer them? And we learn so much from them. And with government, and with intergovernmental organizations like FAO, World Bank, or donors. And there, I think one of the important things is that they have the potential to scale up ideas. And we have if collaborating with them can help shape the narratives that shape what they seek to fund. Like work we've done on the importance of women's empowerment has led to, has contributed to some organizations incorporating that into their program. So that brings me to my third point about communication. And that is communicating with partners. And I guess we're learning how to do it better on a virtual thing, but I tell you, it is not nearly the same as if you can go to the field together and you can sit around at night, and you can just experience things together. So that's the first part of communication. But I think the idea of how can we communicate the importance of lessons we learn to sort of shape the narratives and the mindsets. And how do we get, sometimes it's a matter of distilling something down. I mean, as a bad example, Garrett Hardin's concept of the tragedy of the commons has shaped more than 50 years worth of narratives and policymakers' mindsets and even communities' mindsets that everybody's property is nobody's property. You know, but there have been other examples. That's why FES is talking about promise of the commons, for example. So these are some of the you know, lessons I've tried to pull out from this. Here, shameless advertising, the link to the source book, and the website gamesforsustainability.org has manuals and material about some of these games, and here's some links to a couple of articles about them. And just want to say thank you to you know, all of the partners along the way in CAPRi, in PIM, the Policies, Institutions, and Markets, FES, and others. And thank you for the opportunity to present this and think about it, and I would love to have some discussion with you.
Okay, so clap, clap, clap. Thanks a lot, Ruth. I think that I'm now in the passenger seat with Philippe moving on. So we've got plenty of time for discussion. Thank you for those of you who've actually given the little clap sign. Thank you. I think that was really short and sweet presentation, Ruth, and really easy to follow. And I saw how busy I looked in all those slides, like I was really slaving away and at all the work that we were doing together. So I've got a few questions when we need them, but any comments or questions, you can just turn on your voice and just go ahead, or put up a hand if you would like, or type something into the chat. It's up to you. Let's see. So while we're waiting, so Ruth, we've got I wonder about so you've had the pleasure of, and I think that for me, I feel the privilege of working in the International Agricultural Research System at a specialized research organization that does research on policy analysis. And while IFPRI is probably the single largest employer of agricultural economists in the world, perhaps right now, or at least one of the largest, you've collaborated also with people from universities. So I wonder about, so two questions. One is, how have you found university partners who've been able to successfully kind of work interdisciplinary when there's all these kind of signals that young people, especially young academics, get to be, to work on their own relatively, to work on something which can be well respected by their own discipline, and the rewards may not be there for interdisciplinary work. And I wonder if you have any suggestions, and then I have a question also about students. But first, I guess about the kind of the work cultures toward supporting or not supporting interdisciplinarity.
Yeah, this is a really good point. Some departments seem to be more open to it than others. The people that I have collaborated with the most, I mean, people like Marco Janssen, who is at a Center for Sustainability, and that are, I mean, he's actually a mathematician and he works with archaeologists and all kinds of different disciplines. you're right that the applied orientation of IFPRI or of the CGIAR is because it's about problem solving. That has, well, it took actually a very long time before interdisciplinarity was welcome even at IFPRI. And I'll tell you a specific incentive mechanism that we had to fight a bit on is that the journals that are ranked, initially when the IFPRI list came, it gave higher ranking to journals that only economists published in. And interdisciplinary journals were ranked lower, even though interdisciplinary journals have much broader readership and much higher impact factors. So, you know, we actually have gotten away from that notion. So that's one thing you can do within a department. But my whole orientation to this actually comes from my training at Cornell at what was probably the heyday of interdisciplinarity, where we had an irrigation studies group that had sociologist, economist, political scientist, anthropologist, and engineer, who had all gone to the USAID, had given them money to go to the field together to advise on irrigation systems. And then they taught a class on socio-technical aspects of irrigation. Eleanor Ostrom was another one who did a lot of interdisciplinarity. And I got to work with her, which was just a thrill. So, you know, she's proof perhaps that interdisciplinarity can pay off. I like to remind some of people who claim her as a first woman economist to win the Nobel Prize, to remind them that actually she was a political scientist because economics programs that she applied to turned her down because she didn't have enough math. So anyway, students.
Yeah, I just went, so thanks for that. And I think, you know, we're lucky in our department. We have two disciplines in our department, and then we have Brenda, who helps bridge across and bridges out to other disciplines, you know, beyond the two, which is great. So we have a master's program now, which kind of is a home for students in that area. But generally, I guess with students, if what's your advice to people about how to keep a focus on thinking about problems as they kind of dive into kind of specific project work, and then how might what would you advise them also in kind of a problem orientation mode as they're bridging from being a student to their kind of to professional life?
Ooh, this hits close to home because, I mean, my daughter has just finished her PhD in agricultural economics. And I think to the extent that if you can get associated with projects, that does open up lots of opportunities. I will say that CGIAR, okay, CGIAR is in major flux right now, but we are often looking for and welcoming students who might want to work, do their dissertations associated with our projects. Just today, I have talked with 3 different master's level students who are doing internships on 2 different projects that I'm on. So that's another opportunity to, and at the master's level, you have the opportunity to try that out and see do I want to do this for either permanently or for a while and do something more applied and then go on for a PhD, or, you know, or maybe that you want to stay doing something applied.
Good, thank you. Other questions or comments?
Is Mohammed has his hand up?
Okay, Mohammed Shah, please. Just go ahead.
Hello, thank you for your speak. And I am a new student at the. I am currently doing my MSc. So I just want to know. I mean, how can we, how can we prepare ourselves for getting into institution like if we are, any other such institutions? What are the qualifications that will be, demanded from us in the future?
Yeah. Okay, so for IFPRI, I once would have said that, and it's still the majority of our positions, both at the research support, research analyst level, and at the postdoc, associate research fellow or research fellow, have been for people with strong econometric skills. But that IFPRI is broadening out quite a bit. And you can go to our website and sign up for notifications about positions that are open. And then each one sort of specifies what they are looking for. So some people are doing CGE modeling and they want people who can do that. Other people are looking for people who have really good field skills. And some of it is quantitative, some of it is qualitative. More and more I'm seeing that if you have both, if you have some qualitative along with the quant or some quant with the qual, that is seen as a plus, because more and more studies are really trying to bring them together. Field experience is always a plus. Question is, how do you, so, if you have that opportunity, that's great. Yeah, so those are the main things that I would say. There are other CGIAR centers also list, but it's a little harder. What we need to do is get one kind of master listing where people can find this from any of the centers. Maybe that'll happen in a year or so from now, but at this point you would just have to go to each center to see what their job listings are. But it's worth trying that now to get a flavor for some of the kinds of positions, what they're asking for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have one more if no one else has something. Anyone else? So Ruth, so this feels like sitting in Peter Hazel's office and trying to so I wonder, so you talked about mindset and especially this work on experimental games and having people's experience in experimental games actually affect their ability to think through the implications of different rules or different enforcement mechanisms. And I wonder generally about mindset. I'm doing some work now with World Vision where we're stepping into kind of the area of behavioral change communication assessment, and which is about kind of seeing mindset changes as essential for other changes that may be desirable for the communities that we're working with. So I wonder about your experience, whether you think this is a cool new discipline of economists and other social sciences, kind of applying our tools to different, thinking about assets differently, that assets don't necessarily have to be a cow or a plow. They can actually be a positive attitude toward opportunities, or a positive attitude toward hiring women employees, or a positive attitude toward taking microloan, so that there are different, we're kind of getting into this kind of psychometric and psychological side. Is that something that your colleagues and you have picked up also differently?
Yes. So actually, I'd love to talk with you more about what you're doing on that, because there's quite a few colleagues at CAPRi who work on behavior change communication, but specifically on nutrition and health. And it's often like trying to get, using, so the nutritionists have been doing a lot on behavior change communication for breastfeeding and, these kinds of things. I hadn't seen much of that in affecting kind of the natural resource management, but Marco Janssen got me into this. There is a literature on mental models, and it's not all that new, because you may remember a really intense day working with Konrad Hagedorn on a conceptual framework for our study on poverty, on the effect of, where in the action arena, he talked about action resources, including cognitive schemata, which is almost a class. It was, habitus and cognitive schemata as action resources. And that's a classic case, I think, of a big word that can sometimes mask a really important idea. But the cognitive schemata is your mental, is your mindset, whether you have the vision that people could come together to share groundwater. Do you have the vision? I mean, do we have the vision that we could come together to solve climate change? If nobody believes it is possible, it will not get done. And so that cognitive schemata is an asset. It absolutely is. So that's part of it. And so I think there is probably a lot more research available in adjacent fields, in psychology and some of these others. And what we kind of need is good guides that pull out and tap us into the key concepts and all in that.
Thank you. So that was a free consulting advice. Thanks for that.
And payback, I want to hear what you're doing on this study on with World Vision.
Thank you. Anyone else?
So can I comment on the issue on partnerships? One of the things, the Aramat project, I have so much admiration for that, and I think it will teach a lot of us a lot more about, we talk about partnerships with communities or whatever, but really understanding the terms under which that should take place. Well, thank you guys for the opportunity.
Okay, so let's put our hands together in whatever way we can do that, and say thank you to Ruth. Thanks a lot for joining us from wherever you may be. I assume it's St. Louis, but yeah. It's
Well,
really
thank you
wonderful.
guys.
Yeah.
Thanks. Okay.